so many of the people I work with, we create that breakfast and that kind of timeline from when they wake up to doing the activity, have that nailed, and they feel confident and happy with the food they're having because they have it regularly and they know they feel good off of it. And I think getting confidence with that food that you have on the day is important because it's a worry off your mind.
Welcome to Discovering Nutrition with Cronometer. I'm your host and community marketing manager, Eliisa. I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Will Gerling. Will is a highly respected performance nutritionist with over a decade of experience in the industry. Since 2014, Will has been fueling athletes from all levels, from amateurs to elite pros, including EF Pro Cycling, Olympic competitors, and Tour de France riders. Will's expertise is backed by impressive credentials, holding a postgraduate diploma in sports and exercise nutrition, a master's of science, and he's currently pursuing his doctorate. But his impact extends beyond the academic. He's cooked on Jamie Oliver's YouTube channel, appeared on national TV and radio, in magazines, and various newspapers. Will has not only competed in strongman and ultra-distance cycling, but has also taught cooking with Adidas, written as a columnist for Cycling Plus, and has been featured on Channel 4's Food Unwrapped. In this episode, we're distilling elite performance nutrition principles into accessible strategies that empower individuals like you and me to achieve their optimal results. We'll explore questions like, does low carb really fuel your best performance? And discuss why focusing on nutrition just before an event simply isn't enough. You actually need to start weeks in advance to truly optimize your outcomes. Neat. As always, this podcast is for general purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including getting medical advice. The use of information from this podcast is at the listener's own risk and is not to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Additionally, please note that the views expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Cronometer. Okay, I can't wait for this one. Let's dive in. So you're a busy man.
In recent times, yes, very busy, but looking for new ventures and things now because I'm actually leaving EF at the end of this season.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I am indeed.
What are you going to do? Are you going to still do...
I'm going to finish my doctorate.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I'm going to finish my doctorate. So I'm going to put a lot of my energy and time into that and, dive a bit more into nutrition. But it's actually, I've changed my thesis a lot from moving from like low energy availability and looking at RED-S or, relative energy deficiency syndrome within like athletes and how that might exist within professional cycling. And now I'm kind of diving a bit more down, talking about structure and culture change within a team and inter-team relationships and how you create change and what change looks like and discussing, I guess, more about that, which I find significantly more interesting. It's not necessarily like the nitty gritty of nutrition, but like there's a big realization I've had that like when you arrive in a team, you have to innovate and create structure to then change culture. And then once you start to get a culture, that becomes the foundation of everything you do. Because if you have no culture within the team about nutrition, then you can't do anything really because nobody's interested.
It's funny. I've listened when I was doing my homework for this episode, I listened to other episodes that you've recorded with other people. And it was interesting. You did talk about like getting buy-in from some people, and you were saying that like working with younger athletes, they're a little bit more open to making changes. And I think that one of the things that I really wonder about is I don't really know, and maybe you can help clarify what percentage of improvement someone could actually make with nutrition. Like I'm so curious about that because a lot of people, professionals obviously have access to like way more equipment and machinery and professionals to be like, okay, you've actually made improvements. You've improved by like 3% because you've changed your nutrition. But I was recently talking to a junior A hockey team and I was encouraging them to use Cronometer. And I'm like, what percentage, though, if they actually paid attention to their nutrition, would they improve? Because I don't think people totally get that yet, that that's a piece, like they'll go to the gym for 2 hours, but they're not then going to put the same amount of effort into their nutrition. I don't think. I mean, you would see a different side, but.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think within nutrition anyway, and you probably know this, obviously working within the nutrition world, but like the answer, it depends, kind of comes up a lot, and it like that context. But what's interesting about that is you could say it's 100% improvement, because if you take an athlete who is up there, he's contending, he's being around, he's coming in the top 10s, but he's not winning. And then he does focus on his nutrition and then he's winning. That's technically 100% improvement, because now he's gone from being arguably, it doesn't matter if it's 10th or 20th really, but to winning a race is everything. And if you're winning races, that's what ultimately matters. And there's definitely examples and individuals who have been new athletes, young ones who are hungry and driven and they want to make a name for themselves. And then there's also ones that are at the other end of the spectrum where they're like looking to get another year in the game and to stay in it as long as possible, to keep earning or to keep winning, that want to eke out every bit they can, that suddenly want to listen and just absorb all that information. Yeah, there are like, stories of romance like that. And I think I had that a lot this year with like Alberto, where I worked very, very closely with him nutritionally this year and started to win a lot of races and become like top fives in races and be at the pointy end of the race. And that's exciting. And that's, a percentage of, like not winning to winning.
Did he feel like the things that you guys were actioning together were the differentiators to give him better success?
Yeah, because it's one of the only real things we changed this season. So, I did a nutrition plan for him since January all the way up, through to like the Tour de France, really. And there are a couple of other bits we did in changing how he did some of his camps and stuff. And I don't think, that there's flexibility within that. I don't think he stuck rigidly to it all the time, but I think there was a big drive from himself and some, discipline that he put into action. So I'm not going to say it's all me, but like, there's a few factors that come into it. But, we worked really hard on his nutrition this year and it seemed to really pay dividends.
How do you get someone who's reluctant to buy in to working with you and actually making the changes? Because ultimately, people are responsible for what they put into their bodies. Like it is different than a personal trainer walking you through an hour-long session, going through the movements with you. Like food is something that people are consuming probably roughly throughout 16 hours of every day. So
yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the challenges with it as well. It's like it's easy to be, well, I say easy, but it's easier to be focused for that one training session you've got that day, right? Or two training sessions, because it's taking up, like you're saying, only a few hours of your day. Whereas nutrition consumes all the, every part of every day, whether that's during exercise or in those meals.
Well, I was just wondering how you get people to adhere to something like that, or how you get a buy-in, because it isn't just, a 1 hour session. This is something that people have to commit to doing without your help, technically speaking. Like you can make a plan, but you're not, force feeding these people.
That's the interesting dynamic, I think, within team sport, because if you're working as a consultant or like, a coach to somebody who's hiring you, they have a literal vested interest in that because they're paying for your service and they're there because they've found themselves wanting to be there. Whereas you can be within a team environment and there are going to be athletes that aren't interested, but could do with the help. And it's a case of sometimes them realizing, actually, like I said, said before, staying in the game and actually wanting to start winning, and they've exhausted all the other things that they've tried to do themselves and realize, actually, maybe I need to do something a bit more. Or maybe somebody they trust has had a great experience within the team, somebody else, because there are other success stories within the team, and then suddenly they're winning and other people are like, oh, what's he doing? Like
he's working with Will Girling.
Well. yeah, I wish. But, I think that's what's so funny about the peloton as well, is that like at points in a race, it's just a bunch of guys riding together, all women, obviously, for the women's races as well. And they're all just riding together and they'll chat and they're like, they all talk about different stuff and like what's going on and whatever else. So word gets about certain things.
That's amazing. Just, racing for your life and exchanging trade secrets. I'd probably be a little too out of breath. As per usual, I've gotten ahead of myself. So I meant to really ask how you got into the field of performance nutrition and what inspired you in particular to work with elite athletes like EF Pro Cycling.
Yeah, it was a culmination of, I was a personal trainer. I'd had a poor history with and relationship with food myself, which I think is very common with people that go into like being a PT or doing nutrition or something. I had a poor relationship with it. And as I kind of went down that journey, I realized, nutrition's where I really want to focus time, energy, and understand more, because I felt like there's so much I didn't know. And then I started to study into it. And then it's like opening Pandora's box. And suddenly you realize just how much you don't know. And you just keep diving down and keep looking at more. And I think that joined with, I had a passion for bike packing. Me and a couple of friends went out and did some like great bike packing trips, riding like 1,000 miles and just free camping and exploring, doing it that way gave me a real passion for cycling. And when you look at sports that nutrition is super important for, it's the ones where the duration starts to get longer and longer, where they have to fuel on during the activity and they have to consume like a carb load and so on. And suddenly there's so many facets you have to think about, and it's like a puzzle. And then that puzzle gets a bit harder when you also add in the personality of the rider you're working with. So that's kind of how I ended up on that journey in terms of finding nutrition interesting, having a passion for cycling. And I did my postgraduate diploma, my master's degree, and now doing my doctorate. And I think there's always more to learn and discover. And I think your perspective changes a lot as well.
I was just doing another podcast episode yesterday, and I said, I think that that's like one of the number one things that I look for when I'm looking at thought leaders in the nutrition and health space is the ability to go back on things that they've said and just be like, I was actually wrong, or this has evolved, or the science now points to. And I think that that's really important. And I think that we are on the precipice, I think, of just understanding nutrition a lot better than we have. But it's just one of those things that it takes years, if not decades, to like fully understand the ramifications of certain decisions, So it is a hard one. And I commend anyone that's diving in as deep as you, because a doctorate in will it be in nutrition?
Yeah, it's in the field of nutrition, and sports science.
That'll be amazing. I think that's so great. One of the things I really wanted to accomplish today, obviously you're used to working with, athletes at the top of the game, but a lot of our listeners are people that are, I don't want to call them like weekend warriors, but people are that are competing in different races in their own homes. And they are, relying on us with Cronometer to give them good data. And I actually, interestingly, we just did a collaborative reel on Instagram with a couple that just did a bike packing adventure, and they went 14,700 kilometers.
Oh, wow. Big ride.
It was so cool to follow along in their journey, honestly, and have used Cronometer every day for like 4 years. And just what an important piece that is for them to make sure that they're fueled. So basically, I just was kind of hoping that we could take all of your wisdom and then to kind of apply it not only to, top level athletes, but also people that are competing and then have full-time jobs and families and that kind of thing. So one of the first questions I had in that vein, and this can go for people that are at the top of the game or people that are just dabbling, what are some of the key elements that you focus on when you're creating nutrition plans for performance or endurance nutrition?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, when I work with people, obviously understanding where they are and where the current challenges are that they face. But if we just say a lot of the time, it's just people aren't sure how to apply nutrition to their training program and how to manage it through their week. And some of that comes from a case of maybe not fully understanding how much protein, carbohydrate, and fat is in the food that they eat, but then how much they need to eat of those foods in relation to that activity. And I think that's the most underpinning thing is like the total amounts of things. Just how much is it when I'm doing a rest day? How much is it when I'm doing like a 4-hour day? When I'm doing this activity and so on. And when you start looking at that total and they start understanding that, you can then move on to like timing and like how do we time that around exercise and how do we perfect the amounts of those in relation to what you're doing. And then further to that is the case of type as well, like what type of food are we having now in accordance with the timing and the total, and marry those like general overall things, and your diet's going to be pretty good.
That sounds like a lot of sciencing and trial and error. Is it a lot of trial and error, or do you think that there is a set structure that's going to be good for most people?
I think the nuance that changes with people and individuals is managing likes and dislikes of food, how they feel off certain foods, and maybe any like personal issues that they're having, because certain people are more susceptible to gut issues or that feeling they have of discomfort eating certain foods. And then it's working around those, because we know for sure that if someone's training a certain amount of hours per week, or they're looking for optimal recovery or losing body fat and maintaining performance, that certain amounts of protein needs to be consumed like that, and that's pretty much set. And we know that should be this way to support that. And we know how much carbohydrate in general we should be having around certain amounts of activity again. But they're ultimately just numbers in relation to kilograms. It's then making that fit around that person's lifestyle, their cultural meals and habits. And that's like that nuance I mentioned about making it fit for that person.
A lot of personalization, it sounds like.
Yeah.
If you're managing a lot of athletes too, I can't even imagine what that looks like. Like, trying to remember their preferences, their dietary restrictions, and then who they are as people and their relationship with food. That is a matrix that I commend you for solving all the time. One of the questions that I have, I'm going to talk about my own experience a little bit, just because I do like running long distances. I'm out there just running a marathon on my own. I'm not signing up for races. I think that maybe I'm too competitive to do something like that. I'd fall short and it would be psychologically damaging for me. But one of the things I'm curious about is before an event. So say I'm going to go run a marathon. How long before that would you say that nutrition really matters? Should I be doing something for 12 weeks beforehand? Or like, how long does it take your body to adapt? What is the optimal timing for beginning a nutrition plan for a performance event?
If we're speaking specifically about fueling for that event and what that looks like, it'll ultimately dictate how is dependent on how long that event is. The longer an event goes on for, the more you need to train for it nutritionally. And that's also a case of gut training, ultimately, that if you're having to do an event or a run or a cycle that's lasting definitely 3 hours, but for sure 4 hours and above, then you're going to have to look at gut training, which will take at least 4 to 6 weeks, which is you training your stomach to manage to take on higher volumes of food and liquid during that activity, to get comfortable with it and to get efficient with breaking that down whilst exercising. And 4 to 6 weeks is kind of the minimum for that. If it's a shorter duration than that, then you can get away with a little bit more.
Tell me about gut training. What is that? Like, how would I even train my gut to adapt?
Yeah. So let's say you are going to do a 4-hour event, I think. And if you're going to do that, you look at, okay, what products am I going to take on the day? What brand is it? And then kind of just work backwards, starting at maybe where you are comfortably at in terms of nutrition right now. And let's say that's 40 grams an hour. So you go out on your long ride or long activity session each week, and you do that 40 grams an hour. And then next week, when you come around to it, you then do 50 grams an hour, and then 60, and then 70. And you just keep working your way up until you reach around that 90 grams an hour would be ideal for a 4-hour race. And your stomach, just like your training in general, gets adapted and better at dealing with it, and it starts to be able to empty the stomach quicker. It starts to be able to deal with the fact that you're exercising and you're digesting food at the same time more efficiently, and you're able to work your way up to that higher limit. And there is some difference between people in that limit. Some people, I've got guys that can go up to 150 grams an hour in terms of what they eat on the bike, which is a crazy amount of food. But there's, yeah, it's loads. But then there's other people that, top out at around 80 grams an hour. And some of that's individuality. So it's finding that limit. And you know when you reach it, because it starts to feel a bit uncomfortable. And, I wouldn't stop the first time you feel that discomfort. I would try and do it again the next time. And if you're not able to push past that, then you're probably reaching that point. You just need to make sure you're using the right products to take yourself there.
What does that look like? When you're talking about people biking and having 150 grams of carbs, I'm just picturing them chugging like liquefied pasta because I've heard that pasta is a staple on the tour. But what does that look like? Is that gels? Is that, like supplements, like carbohydrate supplements? What are people having?
It's a whole mixture. It'll be from a carbohydrate-based drink. It'll be from bars, gels, and then semi-solid bars, which are like your chews, essentially. A bit like jelly chews. It's like a bar of Jell-O, really.
And people are just eating those as they're actually moving. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I've always stashed like those kinds of gels. I forget who makes them. They're called like blocks or something. And I'll stash them in the forest along my run route. Yeah. And then I'll just quickly go over and just pound a bunch back. But there is no science here. I'm just like, well, I'm halfway through. I probably should eat something. That's really funny. So you got to train your gut. So we're doing that, you said 4 to 6 weeks before?
Yeah, 4 to 6 weeks before.
And then how about, I hear a lot about carbo loading and protein. How does that fall into training for these things? And when should people start paying attention to the volume?
Yeah, I would probably do that similar over that 4 to 6 week period. I think so often, the pitfalls of essentially going to an event is that people don't practice anything to do with nutrition. They do most of their training sessions, whether it's running or riding or a combination, with food you're going to use on the day. And then they haven't practiced the carb load. They end up at their event, which is sometimes where they've had to book a hotel. And they have they go out to Italian and they get like pizza or they get pasta or whatever like this. And they think that one meal is going to solve it all, and inevitably eat so much in the evening that they feel then uncomfortable in the next day. And they're thinking, oh, I feel so bloated. And then they start running and they're like, oh, I need to go to the toilet now. Like it's all going wrong. So you definitely want to practice that carb load, understand what that looks like, what foods you want to strive for to achieve that. And the same thing with your breakfast on the day of. So many of the people I work with, we create that breakfast and that kind of timeline from when they wake up to doing the activity and have that nailed. And they feel confident and happy with the food they're having because they have it regularly and they know they feel good off of it. And I think getting confidence with that food that you have on the day is important because it's a worry off your mind.
I do hear a lot about people that have to go to the bathroom during races. And I think that would be especially when I'm with spectators. I don't even know what you would do in that case. You just stop in at the closest.
You hear a lot of stories about a lot of different things happening.
What happens in the Peloton stays in the Peloton. Maybe they're asking for more than just nutrition advice. That's so funny. When it comes to, so obviously there's the gut component, but when we're talking about like sustaining energy levels with that kind of event, is it just the couple days before, or is that something that you need to pay attention to? Like, should I be adjusting my macronutrients on days where I'm training versus not? Should I be, making sure that my glycogen stores are really full? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I guess when you're initially starting out, if somebody's got no background in it, we break it down and make it a bit more linear, maybe initially. So it's just the same every day in relation to the total amount of activity you do over a week. But realistically, the best way to do your nutrition is to eat it, essentially fuel for the work required, and eat in line with the amount of hours and the training sessions you're doing. And that's going to maximize your recovery. It's going to maximize your adaptation to that exercise and also how you perform during that exercise. And I think it's very common within the endurance space where somebody goes out for like a 6 hour session, and they burn so many calories that they haven't really started the day right, or they haven't eaten enough on the bike, and then they get back and they're essentially finishing their day, and they're about anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 calories down on what they should be having. And that's when it starts to be a bit like, well, the next day, which might be their rest day, they're absolutely ravenous and they're eating everything. And then it's like they're massively over consuming on that rest day. And that's typically just because they're not in line with how many calories they should have on each day. So if you're able to do that, you're already well on your way.
This is very relatable, as any time after I run any long distance, I could eat myself out of house and home. It's incredible. And I don't want it to be like that. I'm like, obviously my body, if I'm putting back 4,000 calories, I'm not a big woman. The following day, I'm like, obviously I've not done something correctly beforehand if I'm this ravenous. But I'm so fascinated with knowing how much I should consume on any given day, because a lot of our Cronometer users, when they just start using the app, we kind of had the same recommendation. We're like, don't try to have different macronutrients on different days. Don't try to eat back your calories, that kind of thing. Like, let's just get the basics of tracking, of kind of seeing where you're at. And then we'll go ahead and start, playing around with carb cycling and that kind of thing. But it's hard, I think, to know what's working effectively when there's so many variables, because it's not just a workout that can affect your appetite or how you're feeling. It can be your sleep. It can be how you perform before. So I think that it's kind of hard to say for sure what is working nutritionally all of the time. Are you able in your job with all the equipment that you have access to, and obviously your big brain, are you able to really find out how to dial in nutrition outside of the other, like sleep and recovery and all of that?
What, and how those things affect it or impact it?
Yeah, like how to find out if your nutrition is really the thing that's working, or they're not just getting, an extra hour of sleep a night and that kind of thing. Like, how are you testing to find that nutrition is particularly effective?
I guess there's certain markers and goals that maybe you're aspiring towards that would definitely be attributed towards nutrition. So if you're looking to drop body fat and still maintain performance, and very often with people that I work with, their performance improves whilst dropping that body fat. And that's purely just from optimizing the ratios of what they're eating, managing what they're having and when. And, the proof's in the pudding, as it were, in that if they, 12 weeks down the line are 5 kilos, 10 kilos lighter, and their watts or run time is just as fast, or if not faster, probably because they've lost 10 kilos, then that's evident that it's in relation to the nutrition. And the same thing for if you're working with someone specifically for an event or a race, where then training nutritionally to perfect race week and to have that gut training and to know what to do on the day. There are obviously, of course, other things, because if your nutrition's correct, your sleep's probably going to be better as well, because you're going to be able to recover better and fall asleep more easily and efficiently. Whereas if your calories are too low, sleep will be disturbed. If carbohydrate amounts are too low, blood glucose will go low during sleep, which will cause more disturbances during it. So that, there's a lot of factors that can apply to it. And I think, you're quite right. Like, sleep's bad, ghrelin also increases, which increases appetite. So there's a lot of factors in there.
There's so many. It's honestly sometimes overwhelming, especially because people want to optimize, but they obviously don't have access to people like you or all of this equipment. And I myself am in that camp, and I'm like, how can I just get a little bit better at everything I'm doing? One of the things that I heard you say on another podcast, which I thought was deeply fascinating, was, I don't know what it's actually formally called, but you were talking about monitoring people's sodium loss and how it's different per person.
Yeah.
And you can there was a way that you said that you can kind of tell if someone is losing a lot more sodium than other people. And was that they have like salt streaks or something?
Yeah, definitely.
So walk me through that whole process. I'm so curious about, because obviously electrolyte balance is really important when it comes to hydration. What should people be looking for in terms of those streaks? Because I honestly just thought it was dried sweat. I finish a run, I'm wearing a black hat, and then I have all this white stuff, and I'm like, oh, I just like sweat.
Yeah, they're salt lines.
I've never heard of that. So can you?
Yeah, as your sweat's dried, it's got the sodium within the sweat that is then dried within the clothing, which has then created the salt lines. If you are a very heavy sodium loss individual, that's not an exact science, because you could also be a high fluid loss individual with a very normal sodium loss. But because you're losing loads of fluid, you're actually, over time still losing a lot of sodium. But there are telltale signs of high sodium loss, that being one of them. If you have like a lot of salt, or like, crustiness on your face, or salt lines on your clothing, or in particular, if you're doing quite usually over longer duration activity and heat, if you're drinking a lot of fluids, and maybe fluids with a bit of sodium in, if you're still getting maybe headaches or some nausea later on in that ride, chances are that you are quite low on sodium. And that's something to definitely look out for. There are tests you can do, of course, as mentioned in that podcast, about looking at sodium loss rates per liter, and they are very individual. It can range. I've got guys going from 150, 180 milligrams per liter, which is very low, all the way up to nearly I think 1800 milligrams per liter. So like the spectrum is huge, and you can train yourself to be better at it. There is heat acclimatization that you can do, which will help reduce the amount of sodium you lose per liter, but it will still stay within a certain ballpark.
Fascinating. When I finish a run, my skin is like caked in a layer of basically now I am learning like sodium essentially. And I remember when I started running marathons, I would be like, okay, I just need, like, I went on Google. I'm like, tell me how much sodium I should be consuming. And nowhere did I find, maybe I wasn't deep enough in there, that was something that could be very individualistic, which I'm assuming then could drastically affect performance. Or is that something that won't change your performance that much?
No, it can definitely affect your performance. I think people that get cramps, more often than not, we find cramps actually come from something that isn't sodium related. That's because very often you'll find that cramps happen when maybe you're pushing yourself a bit harder than you have done before. Maybe you're in a race, or you're running further than you've ever run before, like a marathon. You obviously will have done training runs in the lead up to a marathon, but you wouldn't have run a marathon. So when you're at your most fatigued, towards the end is probably where you'll get that cramp, and that's just because you're not used to being able to manage that level of volume for that duration. And other factors will contribute to cramps, such as dehydration, which isn't specifically in relation to sodium amount, carbohydrate availability and status. So if you're too depleted on carbohydrate, that'll also increase your risk of cramps. But for sodium in specific, we need to remember we don't start from zero, and then when we start exercising, we're already going into a deficiency. We'll start from hopefully a normal state of sodium level, which then as you start to exercise will start to get depleted. So if you have a normal sweat rate, which could be anything between kind of like 400 to 800 milligrams per liter, if you're consuming 200 to 600 milligrams a liter of sodium, and you're not doing crazy duration exercise, that'll probably cover your losses, and you'll be fine.
I could sit here for 3 hours and ask you so many questions that would hopefully make me run better and with less pain. That'd be amazing. One of the things that I've heard about is, staying on top of your nutrition, obviously. And we've talked about that a little bit today, but how do you know when you're doing these activities that you should be fueling again? Is that like you're looking down at your watch and you're like, oh, I've burned 300 calories, or you like, I've been exercising for an hour? Because I know what it feels like to fall behind on my nutrition, not necessarily running, but I'll go out for long hikes. I won't eat anything. I've been hiking for like 7 hours, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel so ill now. And it's too late then at that point for me to regain my energy, or that's how it feels. Is there truth in that? Like, how should people be staying on top, so to speak, of their nutrition?
Yeah, I think the best way to understand it is about the duration that you're doing again. If it's under 2 hours, what's more important is the amount of carbohydrate you're eating before that session. Now, if it's between 90 minutes and 2 hours, and if it's very intense, then having something during could be worthwhile. But definitely less than 90 minutes, you could probably get away with not having anything. as long as you've had adequate carbohydrate beforehand. Anything above 2 hours, we start then to look at kind of, how intense is it? How long are you really going for? And that's then the question of how big should that meal be before you go out? If you're going to go out for a 7-hour hike and not have anything, then maybe it's not the best idea.
They just escalate, Will. I'm like, okay, there's like, there's a pretty view over there. And I'm like, I'll just go to that peak. And then it's like, well, one more. And then before I know it, I'm, coming home in the dark and completely famished and just wishing that I had one of my emergency Cliff Bars. But I don't learn. I don't learn.
Well, it always makes for great pizza afterwards.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I will eat the nearest anything I'm stopping for sure. And then I have no guilt about, putting back a whole pie by myself. So it works out. One of the things I was curious about too, we've seen a lot of keto the last couple of years and carb cycling and a lot of emphasis really on, what's better for endurance activity. You mentioned in another podcast that there was a rowing team that was like mostly doing keto diet and that was effective for them. Oh yeah,
the guys that rode the Atlantic Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that worked out well for them because from what I understand, then they could bring less food. So that was actually, obviously also just logistically speaking, made a lot of sense for them. But are there any popular trends that you've seen that are coming out that are showing promise? And are there any that you would, maybe caution against people using?
This is how we get like lots of angry people in comments.
No, but I think it's good to be able to push a little bit. And there are different strokes for different folks, for sure. And nutrition is very specific. But I think that there also is some science that we...
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for any of these things, like if people feel good off it and they feel happy and they're content and it's allowing them to do the things they want to do, then great, like all the power. To you for sure. Is it optimal by science? Maybe not. I think keto is definitely one of those things. I think if you're going to do very long, steady state duration exercise with minimal high intensity, then keto is very effective because it's food source that it's more calories per gram, it's more efficient. The amount of fat you have stored on you is significantly more than the amount of carbohydrate you can store on you. But it does need to fit those requirements. You need to know you're not going to be doing super high intensity riding. And that's a hard thing to try and guarantee. Luckily, obviously, for the guys that rode the Atlantic Ocean, it's pretty much always the same pace and it's all very flat.
They didn't have a choice either. They committed to the plan and they had to execute,
Yeah, exactly.
You're out there. You're not ordering a pizza. So
no, exactly. But like I think if people are doing like, RAM or like transcontinental, like if you're taking that kind of thing seriously, and then you're also looking at sometimes you're at the mercy of what the gas station has. Like keto is not always going to be the best choice. And if you take yourself out of ketosis as well, you're going to feel awful if you're still doing the activity that you're doing, because your efficiency of certain energy substrate is changed with how often you use it. And that's kind of in line with that carb cycling, doing fat adaptation rides and doing low carb or carb depleted rides is a case of getting more efficient at using fat for a fuel source, which does happen. But I give the analogy of like builders that knock down fat walls and builders that knock down carbohydrate walls. And if you go keto, you will employ significantly more builders to knock down fat walls, but you'll lay off all your builders that will knock down carbohydrate walls. Because and these builders are essentially enzymes. So you will reduce the amount of enzymes you have to deal with carbohydrate. So then if you start taking on carbohydrate, you'll be incredibly inefficient at using it. It's a marrying up of like, well, if I'm going to do fasted rides to get more fat adapted, I still need to do carbohydrate fed rides. So I'm not, completely laying off all my builders that, are good at just, getting rid of carbohydrate walls. And there's also other risks as well, like very low carbohydrate state training can also suppress the immune system more from it, which can in turn, it'll increase cortisol, which in turn further increases suppression of your immune system, opening up your potential risk of sickness. So there are certain things to think about and consider.
Do any of the athletes that you work with, are any of them on a ketogenic diet?
No, zero.
And that is a good way to look at it with the builders. I think that, you know, I myself have tried keto diet. I felt like being the community manager at Cronometer, we saw like a huge influx of people that were doing keto. And I'm like, okay, I got to understand, you know, where these people are coming from, because I didn't understand like why it was so significant that data be so accurate. And I was napping every day at 3 p.m. My body is just, you know, I just wasn't performing. I felt very sluggish, and cognitively I felt like I was, you know, just not sharp at all. And so I think that it was good. I tried it for 30 days, which may not be enough time, but is still, I think, a fairly decent commitment, and was very happy to come back to my unemployed builders that were carbs. Are there any misconceptions that you see about nutrition as well that you'd like to debunk or clarify?
Ooh, like what?
I don't know. Do you just see any trends that are coming out and you're like, no, just don't?
A lot of like old school ones as well, like eating's cheating, like when you're exercising and things like this, and which is definitely not the case. There was obviously like a big one on like becoming vegan for performance, which is, you know, definitely not right. I read a lot of the papers that they use for Game Changers, and even within those, they still recommend striving to hit like 2 grams per kilogram body weight of protein. And, you know, if people want to be vegan for, you know, moral choices in particular, then obviously fine to do so. I just think that there are a lot of nutritional considerations in a vegan diet where you do have to supplement like vitamin B12 and omega-3 and certain things like this, which you can get from like there's an algae for omega-3 for vegans and so on. But, you know, you really need to pay attention to it. And the athletes that they have, you know, top of the world, like I think it was Serena Williams is vegan and so on, they would have a nutritionist and they would have a chef and things like this, and they're taking care of their nutrition like that. And I've had a lot of vegans come to me like a year later where they're getting stress fractures and they're getting sick all the time and their performance is dropping. And it tends to be around that year mark for people that start to undertake veganism for athletes. But it can be done healthily, but I just don't, it's not being vegan will make you perform better. It's definitely a fallacy.
Do you think that if someone was vegan and using a tool, say like Cronometer, that they would have a better outcome if they were tracking, so that they would be able to identify, you know, I'm not getting this much protein, or I'm not getting, you know, vitamin B12? Do you think that would make things easier? The tracking
100%,
is then
because you have your micronutrient tracking system, so you're able to see how good your micronutrient values are. And typically the main issue that comes with veganism is if you suddenly exclude loads of food groups that you can eat, it's a lot easier to eat low calorie because you're like, well, I can't eat that. I can't eat that. You know, suddenly all I can eat is lots of fibrous vegetables and beans and things like this, which will fill you up very quickly for quite low calorie, unless you're eating just like hummus and avocado all the time, you know. But yeah, I think that's if they are tracking their food, then definitely, you know, they can do it quite healthily.
We talked a little bit, obviously, about pre-event nutrition and then during. What are your thoughts on how people should be eating to recover?
Expand on that one a little bit more for me.
Okay, I will. So someone does an event and they want to have the best possible recovery from that event. I've heard that people should be consuming, you know, X amount of protein, grams of protein, 30 minutes after an event, and then try to refuel with some carbs. Is there truth in that? Is there a magic window that we should be having a lot of protein on the back end of an exercise? What does that look like?
Yeah, 100%. There is truth in that. I think when you're looking to really optimize recovery, having protein and very high glycemic index carbohydrates, which are very fast absorbing in that immediate kind of post-workout period, will optimize your recovery and also transportation of carbohydrate back into the muscle. That's definitely more important when you're doing multi-day events, or there's something else you need to recover for the day afterwards, or maybe even if you're finishing a late evening training session and going into an early morning training session, it could be useful. But if you're just doing like a one-off event, like a marathon, then I would say the most important thing is just getting the total calories in for the day, and sufficient total protein for the day. Because the totals out and out the most important thing. Because if you get the timing right for everything, but you're still in 1,000-calorie deficit, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that is definitely a good way to put it. Do you recommend a specific amount of protein to consume after, or carbs to consume after? Or because I've heard this magic number being thrown around, it's like 20 to 30 grams 30 minutes after. Is that just a general guideline, or is that just a way to encourage people to have protein? Where did that come from?
It doesn't have to be 20 to 30 minutes afterwards. It could be immediately afterwards. Any time within that first hour afterwards would be ideal. I would have anywhere between 0.3 to 0.5 grams per kilogram body weight, so it's a bit more applicable to the individual. But we've got really new research that's come out, I think from Alan Aragon, showing how people were having like 100 grams of protein post exercise, and it's not going to waste. It's still being used. So I wouldn't overcomplicate it. As long as you're getting some building blocks to come in and repair the damaged muscle walls, then you're in a good place.
Perfect. I'm glad that we cleared that up. I get to debunk so many of the things that I've heard too when I interview professionals. I'm like, this is great. We don't have a ton more time, but I did want to ask you just a couple questions about wearables. And obviously, I know that that's not necessarily your area of expertise. However, I would imagine that you've spent so much time with professional athletes that you kind of have an idea. And I'm just wondering how we can go about, in your opinion, leveraging these wearables that we have. I wear an Apple Watch, and obviously it spits out numbers to me. Like, it's like, it gives me my splits time and that kind of thing. But are there any metrics that you think that people listening could get a lot of value from when it comes to performance from their wearables, whether it be like actually during the event, or, like sleep tracking with Aura or Whoop or that kind of thing?
I think there's real value in those things if you feel like you're having an issue with them. I think just doing it for the sake of doing it, I don't think is always that worthwhile, just because more data doesn't necessarily mean better outcomes. And I think it's quite easy to find with something that you can start to obsess over. I think we found with certain athletes and certain individuals that suddenly they're focusing on what an app is telling them about themselves, rather than more often than not, if you had a shit night's sleep, chances are you don't feel great in the morning. So like if you're and I bought an Aura ring, and I had an Aura, I still have it actually, but like it's not charged at the moment. But like there was a period of time where I was having really poor sleep for like 6 months. And I was like, I should probably look into this now. Like it's not changing or whatever. So I got an Aura ring, found out my sleep was perfect. And actually I had like an allergy to a detergent I was using.
No way.
Yeah, super random like that. And it was like, okay, sleep was great. And it was just like, this was making my eyes feel a certain way. So like, I think there are uses for it, but I don't think just generally getting one is always needed. If you're doing it for training though, so like wearing like a Garmin watch and for like your running splits and things, I think, that's great. Like data for performance outcomes is really good. And if you are looking for to be the most competitive person you can be, I think there is then some good data, especially if you know how to disseminate it, because we've got great data on guys from like Whoop, where like we can see if we see certain heart rate variability values and certain resting heart rate values, we can pretty much predict that they're going to get sick. So we immediately start to cut stuff back and, give them a bit of a few days rest. But you need to get a lot of data, and you need to look at a lot of data to be able to do that. And you need to get sick a few times as well, like to then realize they're going to get sick.
Would that be a low HRV and a high heart rate? Like, are those? Yeah.
Exactly.
I've done them all. I had Aura for a number of years, and I also tried Whoop. And Aura actually told me before I knew that I was getting COVID, before it was cool to get COVID. Not that it's ever cool to get COVID. I don't want to hear that in the comments. But before it was like a thing in Canada, I got COVID, and Aura's like, you have the highest recorded temperature in 3 years or something. And then I was like, oh, but I feel fine. Like, I'm actually totally fine. And I'm like, this is junk. And 2 days later, I felt really sick. And then 2 days after that, I'm like, I should get tested for, and it was positive. That was before there was like at home testing kits. So you actually had to like go and see somebody, and I was blown away. But I did find myself, because I'm so data driven, like I'm a huge data nerd, obviously doing my job here when it comes to nutrition. But I also found myself like paying attention too much to Whoop in particular, because it kind of tells you what day to send it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait to go for this run, because I'm not like, I don't have an event date. I'm just like sitting on, I'm going to run a marathon sometime in say October. And then I'm like waiting for it to be like, okay, send it. And then you're not really taking the cues from your body. Like, I didn't wake up and think, oh, this is the day I feel so good, the birds are singing and whatever. I was like, oh, Whoop told me today's the day, so now I'm going to go.
Exactly.
And I think what do you think about those kinds of recommendations?
100%. We've had the exact same things. Like, people start to look to it to tell them when they feel good, and that maybe they don't want to train because their recovery score is too low and they don't want to do a bad training session. But then, chances are it's probably just better to get something done in line with how you're feeling. But you don't have to send it every session. But if you're always waiting around for that perfect session and whatever, you could be waiting sometimes a while, because it's also impacted by stress and sleep and what's going on in your social life. And what else we had, people. I've had clients do multi-day events and stuff. So this is like non-EF, but like that, they're looking at it, and you're doing a multi-day race and you're putting it out there every day. Expect your recovery score to get crap. It's not going to be 100% and green every day. Like, you're working super hard. You're bike packing as you're doing it, for like these Audaxes or like across continent events. And everybody else is going to be in the same thing. But just because it's told you you're not doing great, now you're starting to not feel great.
Oh, it's psychological then at that point,
Yeah.
Like chicken before the egg. Do you start feeling like crap, or do you feel like crap because your device told you to? Interestingly, I don't know if you follow any mountain biking. Obviously, you follow a lot of cycling, but Red Bull Rampage. Do you know what Red Bull Rampage is for mountain bikers?
I've heard of it, I think.
Yeah, so they basically go and they have this plot of land, and then they have to like dig their lines.
Yes,
and this happens in the desert. And this year, interestingly, which I love to see, a lot of them were wearing wearables, and they on like the race day, they actually like showed the recovery scores over the last 10 days. And unsurprisingly, everyone's are just like a straight decline. And like, like when it comes down to dropping in on these lines that people can easily, like someone this year, his name's Cam Zink, he broke a bunch of ribs because he came off a feature wrong, and there's really high consequence. And I'm like, but we have the data here that they are doing this incredible thing on a day that they have zero recovery. So I think in that, I thought it was really fascinating that we're then asking these athletes to perform on a day that they like maybe take a rest day.
There's a lot of anecdotal stuff about that for Olympians as well, that some like world records, Olympic records and medals are won by people that have like barely slept that night. because they know that the final's tomorrow. They've, only got a couple of hours of sleep, but they go and break this record or win a medal. And, a bad night's sleep might show up poorly on a recovery score, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to perform well ultimately.
This is an important reminder for me because I still wake up sometimes and I'm like, oh, I slept for 5 hours. I shouldn't do anything too strenuous. And just get after it. My final question, Will, that I ask everybody, and that is, if you could recommend that our listeners do one thing today and one thing only that would improve their health or nutrition, what would it be?
I would say to get at least 5 fruit and veg today, which would be one portion of fruit and veg is 80 grams. Just get 5 of them.
5 apples, or should I be differentiating?
I would try and differentiate. Yeah. Don't go for the all-in-one. But it's amazing the amount of people that don't even get. So in the UK, we have 5 a day as a general recommended daily amount to get certain vitamins and minerals. And the amount of athletes I work with that don't even achieve that is quite crazy. If you can get 5 portions of fruit and veg at 80 grams at least each one, you're onto a winner.
I'm not sure that I do that every day, but I always try to. No one that I've interviewed, I think I'm on like episode 40, no one has ever said the same thing. And that is always the piece that I always try to take away and actually leverage. And I've made some really good health improvements because of that. So that's the one I'll be taking in from you. And next time we speak, I'll be eating 5 different fruits and vegetables every day.
Love it.
If people want to find you, we want them to be able to do that. So I know you have a website. Can you tell us what your website is, your social channels, if people want to work with you? Where are you updating all your work?
They can head to, it's just my name. So it's Will Girling. So it's willgirling.com, or it's Will Girling on Instagram. And if they have questions that have been, brought on by today's podcast, they can reach out to me there and message me. Or if they're interested in wanting, to get more help with their nutrition for whatever event they're working towards, they can reach out to me on my website and I'll get back to them and look forward to having conversations with them.
I loved all your headshots on your website.
Well, the fun ones from me.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I thought they were fun. I thought they were so great. Your website's actually it's very beautiful. It's very aesthetic, and you look at it and I'm like, this guy means business. Like, it's very, very nicely done. I was on there yesterday to do my homework, and then when I came across the team ones and the team tab, because you have someone else that works with you as well, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, there's a few of us. I'm getting in the process of getting one more person as well. So, we've all got great experience in working with athletes at this level, and proud to have them on my team, I guess.
Amazing. Your headshots did steal the show, though. So everyone that's listening should go to Will's website just to check those out, because they're super fun. Anyway, it's been a blast having you on here, and I hope that everybody loves this episode, and I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will.
Amazing. I've never had that one before.
I gotta end it on a low note, Yeah. Awesome. Have a great day.
All right. Amazing. Thanks.
Bye-bye. I hope that there was a ton of takeaways in this episode and that your next performance is your best one. If you like this episode, make sure that you subscribe to future episodes or send this to someone who could benefit from advice mentioned in this podcast. Until next time, see you soon.